Hello and welcome to the analysis of winning lineups. I'm Big Italy 42. I'm here talking about the two big winners over the weekend. Obviously, there were more big winners than this, but I'm talking first place in the FanDuel Sunday Million, first place in the DraftKings Millionaire Maker, 1 and 2 million respectively. So I'm going to talk about these guys, kind of break down their lineups a little bit, and obviously, if you're watching this, you were not one of the people that won this $1 to $2 million. And before you ask, in case you were wondering, you already knew the answer to this. It's not me either, unfortunately. Maybe one of these weeks it'll be your lineup or mine that we're going down, break it down, talking about $1 million winnings or $2 million, whatever it may be. But either way, Jeremy Bronson, the FanDuel Sunday Million, 201.32 points, beat the field. Second place was more than 12 points behind him. We're talking 2 full touchdowns behind this guy. So we're going to go and break down his lineup here with this monster score that he had. Starting off with Alex Smith, put up 23.22 points against Houston, 0.6% owned, and rightfully so. Alex Smith, great game manager. He's the guy that wins a lot of games, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. He's not the guy that's going to beat you generally, but also not generally the guy that's going to win you $1 million. But Alex Smith, 3 first-half touchdown passes, coincidentally still none to a wide receiver, 2 of them to Travis Kelce, 1 to Jamal Charles. Only had 18 touchdown passes last year, so Sunday's performance, it's Tuesday now. Sunday's performance was 1/6 of his total touchdown output from last season, so not something to expect every single week from Alex Smith, certainly with 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, but a great performance nonetheless, very low ownership, helping this man, Jeremy Bronson, win $1 million. Speaking of Jamal Charles, that was his first running back. A lot of guys like to pair wide receivers and tight ends with their quarterback, which makes a lot of sense, especially in these tournaments. Matt Ryan, Julio Jones was a very popular one, but one that wasn't popular but ended up winning someone $1 million was Jamal Charles with Alex Smith. And Jamal Charles had himself a nice game. He was a good pair there, $8,900, 5.6% owned, and ended up with 103 total yards, scored that 1 touchdown, the touchdown reception from Alex Smith. So that was a big key for him, and actually one of his lower scoring players, despite being one of his second highest price player, 18.8 points, still a fine performance for him. The guy that you'll see, one of the guys you'll see on both the winning lineups of the main tournaments here is Mr. Carlos Hyde from last night's game. 20-3 win for San Francisco. He was $7,300, 2.2% owned, and he had the biggest game of any running back. Ended up with a monster game, 182 total yards, 2 touchdowns, and as we see on the DraftKings one, his last carry meant a whole hell of a lot there. So, talking about him here, this was an okay matchup for him. Not a great matchup. Obviously, finally the feature back. We had Frank Gore in this backfield before, but we've seen Carlos Hyde be the bruiser. He was a volume guy for Ohio State. As someone from Ohio, I used to see this guy play all the time, and obviously I didn't anticipate this type of performance, but those that had him, he had an incredible, incredible game, and he was only $7,300, which is a really cheap price for a guy that obviously with that sort of upside, which he hasn't shown that upside before, hasn't had a game nearly like that before. But now that he is the feature back, I'm not saying he's going to go 182 yards again, but certainly looks very, very good in that offense. Very comfortable. Big-time upside. Next guy was the chalk play of the week, $9,000 Julio Jones, 30.5% owned. We all knew this Philadelphia secondary was beatable. We all also know that Julio Jones, one of the top, if not the best receiver in all of football. He and Matt Ryan have an incredible rapport as well. Very, very popular play, but man, he just absolutely exploded. 2 touchdowns, 141 yards on 9 catches. He scored twice. And this was the only player on this winning lineup on the FanDuel team that had more than 5.6% ownership. Jamal Charles was the second highest owned. So just keep that in mind as we go through the rest of these guys, how low owned they were. Next up was Percy Harvin, and I really like this call. This was a guy that I had on my radar. I didn't play him, so I'm not over here talking about how, look at me, I did it too. I did not have any Percy Harvin, but in hindsight, feels like it made a lot of sense. We had Sammy Watkins being blanketed by Vontae Davis, so obviously he's the top option in that Buffalo offense. Percy Harvin at $5,600, scored on a 51-yard touchdown from Tyrod Taylor, and he ended up 88 total yards to the score. Most of his damage coming on that one play, but 17.3 points at 5.6 salary and 0.5% ownership. That's going to pay off for you all day long. And then now we have the number 2 wide receiver, who was not an obvious play like Julio Jones was, DeAndre Hopkins against the Chiefs. Obviously, Arian Foster out a week, 2 weeks, whatever it may be. All speculation at this point, but he's the focal point of this offense. And we saw DeAndre Hopkins step up. We saw the Chiefs get up big early, and Hopkins was a big reason why they came back and made this a game, and ended up with 2 touchdowns, 9 catches for 98 yards, caught a 2-point conversion as well, and that's at that $7,800, 3.3%. That was a huge, huge own for him at 28.3. And then now we are looking at the tight end, not named Rob Gronkowski. Obviously, this was not a Thursday through Monday contest, just Sunday, Monday. So the highest scoring and barely over Austin Seferian-Jenkins, and that's Tyler Eifert. Tyler Eifert for the Bengals missed almost the entire season last year, played in just 1 game. And this is an Oakland team that he was facing that this was a great matchup for him. And as is usually the case with a lot of these Bengals receivers is, how good can Andy Dalton do? How consistent can Andy Dalton be? And if Andy Dalton can be consistent with these things, then obviously we can have guys like this put up big stat lines. And that's exactly what we saw from Tyler Eifert. I mean, this guy looked uncoverable. Granted, like I said, it was the Raiders. This is a weak defense, not one that it does well at stopping anyone, really, but especially tight ends. 9 catches for 104 and 2 touchdowns there. And, I mean, his score was huge at 26.9%. If you didn't have one of these high-scoring tight ends, you were not making a big cash here this week. So he was a big, big key there. Next up, kicker. My least favorite part of DFS, but obviously a huge part of FanDuel. And we saw some kickers have big performances here. Stephen Hauschka, one of the lower owned of them. We saw Brandon McManus had a big day. But we're talking about the $1 million winner here. Stephen Hauschka, one of the most consistent, best kickers in all of football against St. Louis. Hit all 3 attempts and 2 extra points there. And $5,100, 3.3%. He got 11 points. That was fine. Perfectly. More than enough. I mean, in fact, he could have had 0 from his kicker and still won this $1 million for second place. So that tells you how good this lineup was. San Francisco 49ers was the defense, 0.6% owned. How you come from behind is having the last defense on Monday night. 14 points for them. No touchdowns, no punt returns for scores, anything of that nature, but 5 sacks and a pick. Only gave up 3 points. That's going to help you win a lot of money, and it did. And so congratulations here to Jeremy Bronson on this. 201.32, $1 million winner. And if you are Jeremy Bronson or you know Jeremy Bronson, tweet me at BigItaly42 or at DF Cafe. I'd love to have him on for an interview, talk about his big score and his thought process as he built his lineup. And as we move over to DraftKings, we had 2 lineups that won over $1 million. I'm talking about the top one, of course, $2 million. And the interesting about this one was, little spoiler alert, not that you're surprised, Carlos Hyde was on this team, and the final carry inside the 2-minute warning, first play after the 2-minute warning, Carlos Hyde carries the ball for 5 meaningless yards, and those 5 meaningless yards were worth $1 million to Balla with an H, Ballah. Second place goes to Beisel 90, won $1 million there. But we're talking about the top dog, barely, but that barely is worth an extra $1 million, so not a bad score there. First off, Tony Romo here was a guy who really, really struggled over the first 3 quarters. Then we saw Des Bryant banged up. Des Bryant ended up leaving with about 8 minutes left and not coming back. 9.6% ownership for Tony Romo. And in the fourth quarter alone, 159 yards and 3 touchdown passes there. So that was a huge one for Tony Romo there in that fourth quarter. Or I'm sorry, 2 touchdown passes in that fourth quarter. So Tony Romo, 27.14 points, absolutely huge. Kind of spoiled Carlos Hyde there already. You know the bonuses on DraftKings. Balla got the bonus for Tony Romo with his late surge over 300. Obviously got Carlos Hyde over 100. Got very close with his next guy, Chris Ivory, guy that we talked about a lot as a good value play this week. And he was 17.2% owned, which wasn't particularly low. A lot of these guys actually weren't on this roster. But 23 points, had 1 catch for 9 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 91 yards. Also had a second one called back there. So definitely a guy that, he was a fairly popular play, but he paid off in a big way. He was incredibly cheap, so he was a great play there. Next guy, John Brown, 14.4% owned against the Saints. Obviously, you wanted to target this game and had a huge total. And John Brown didn't waste any time catching the first touchdown of the game quickly. Ended up being the lowest scoring player on this entire team, 14.6. Just had 3 other catches after that, totaled 4 for 46, 14.6 points there. But obviously a great play. Julio Jones, just 21.8% owned here. I know a lot of people trying to be different, and mix things up, things like that. Obviously, you gotta fade the chocolate sometimes. And notice no Devontae Adams, of course, in any of these lineups, as he threw up not quite a dud, but not what we expected. But Julio Jones, you know the score here. He was huge. got well over 100 yards, 38.1, highest scorer on this team here, and highest scorer, I believe, on the slate behind Rob Gronkowski on the Thursday night games. Next up was Jarvis Landry at 19.4%. A little surprised at his high ownership, but he was very cheap and had good volume, 8 catches for 53 yards, but his touchdown came on special teams on a kick return, so that was huge, obviously. 20.7 points for him, and that ended up helping vault him into the top spot there. Right behind that, Tyler Eifert once again, 3.9% on DraftKings, and as I mentioned earlier, another little anecdote about this, you just couldn't cover him. The Raiders just had no answer. Bengals kept going back to him, made some great plays, and he was huge once again, and even he got the 100-point bonus, or 100-yard bonus there. 34.4 for Tyler Eifert, monster game. And then another popular play, Eddie Lacy at 24%, and highest owned player on this slate, or on this roster, I should say. 99 total yards in a score. Didn't quite get the bonus there. Only 85 of those were rushing yards, but 17.9%. You don't love, but for a popular play, certainly helped you out, and obviously was more than enough for our winner Bala here to get the $2 million. And then the defense here, the New York Jets against the Cleveland Browns. This was a popular play. The Browns, not a very good offense anyway. Josh McCown went down with an injury, and then Johnny Manziel popped in and promptly turned the ball over 3 times. So that was a popular play. That was 17 points. 228.04 was your winning lineup there. So congratulations to the big winners. Maybe take some notes from these, maybe the thought processes of these guys, and continue to follow our content here. We'll help you out as much as we can at dailyfantasycafe.com. I look forward to breaking down some more big winning lineups next week. Hopefully one is you and one is me. And I'll see you next week.